Hey everyone. It is 5 o'clock somewhere, and that somewhere is over here in Madeira, Portugal. Hello to you all. Good morning to you on the West Coast. Happy morning to you. Happy lunchtime to my friends on the East Coast. Happy Frostmas to a lot of you. Well, and any of us over here on this side of the Atlantic, it's happy hour. I'm having a limonana, which is lemon juice, bourbon, mint, in this case a little bit of maple syrup for sweetness, based on a cocktail from a restaurant called Zahav in Philadelphia that's owned by some friends of ours, and Felicia suggested this today, and I think she made a good choice for me. So today we're going to talk about one of my least favorite topics, and that's winter. You may have noticed that I moved to get rid of winter. Not entirely, but partly my health and my asthma just were not agreeing with the winter we had to offer in Vermont. And thankfully things are better over here in Madeira. Ironically, I spent the morning setting up a chest freezer where I'm going to force some tulips and daffodils because it's just not quite cold enough to make them happy here. So I moved away from winter only to try to figure out ways to have a little bit of winter in my life. So the irony is not lost on me. We're going to talk about, what do plants need in the winter? What do you need in the winter? I'm asking you, what do you need? Winter's such a great time for learning, for reflecting, hopefully for relaxing, hopefully for traveling, but really just any general questions we've got time for it today. It's going to be kind of a wide-ranging topic. I've got a lot of points that I want to hit on. Before we get too far into it, I'm curious how many of you all are using Shopify. If you are using Shopify and you wouldn't mind us asking a couple questions, our whole store is based on Shopify, and we are working on some new functionality that will help your ordering process be easier, but I think it might be helpful for those of you selling to florists or trying to schedule your inventory for more than 1 week at a time. So just curious, if you're working with Shopify and want to talk about it, send us a message. Jocelyn, our programmer coder, is really wonderful, and she's helping us figure out some new functionality that might be good for all of us flower farmers. I want to touch on another thing real quickly because we're open books here. I've gotten 2 reports of people experiencing white rust on their chrysanthemums. Now, it is a pretty vigorous, pretty devastating pathogen. It'll just rip through your chrysanthemums really quickly. Unfortunately, we do have it in the US. There's a lot of discussion about that, about the prevalence of it in America. And we're seeing a little bit more of it show up. So if you happen to see it, we want to know about it because, well, really, you're required to report it. It is what they consider a quarantine pathogen. And the USDA wants to know about it so we can track the spread of it in the US. We're also just curious to know where it's showing up. With this really wet, strange summer that a lot of us have had, it's not surprising that it has proliferated in some places. It's probably coming in on imported cut flowers from Colombia and Ecuador and other places that are then maybe just thrown on a compost heap where the spores can, live on that dead foliage for up to 2 months. And then the spores can travel even a half mile in the air and, land on a healthy plant. It didn't come from our cuttings. The Syngenta has a really strict protocol. It's kind of their mission in life is to make sure, or Yoder is an associate of Syngenta that produces these cuttings. They spend every moment of every day preventing chrysanthemum white rust. But if you've had it, we want to know about it. So that's just 2 little announcements. So now we're going to talk about winter. Like I said, some of you have finally gotten frost. I know in Vermont we almost always had frost on September 15th, but I believe you've just gotten it now. So 5 or 6 weeks later, we don't know it's normal anymore. And we're just going to have to adapt to that. So that's sort of why I want to talk about winter, because winter is not the same as it used to be. Winter might not be, well, it probably won't be what you expect it to be this year. It just never is anymore. So like what's winter? Why do we have it? Well, obviously we know the sun rotates around the Earth, and the Earth is on an axis. So as we go around, we're getting different amounts of sunlight. Sometimes you're tilted closer to the sun. That would be summertime, which gives us longer days and more intense sunshine. And in the winter, we tilt away. Shorter days, less intense sunshine. So you can imagine that if you're not getting as much sun for as many hours of the day, it's going to be colder. So that happens on the entire northern hemisphere at the same time, entire southern hemisphere at the same time. We experience winter. It's really just a lack of, radiant energy from the sun. Honestly, for years, I never really paid much attention to it. I just kind of hated it. I'm like, oh, it's cold. I don't like this. I'd rather be growing. But I wasn't paying attention to what was really going on out there. And over time, I've really learned to watch, because every day is a little bit different. There's something you can learn from observing winter, even if you have many months of it, like I was accustomed to previously. So there's really two things to comprehend. So you need to understand what the plant wants. I always like to start with the plant. The plant's needs are the same as they've been for, probably hundreds of thousands of years. They're not really going to change. What is changing is our conditions. But even, beyond climate change, understanding your own conditions goes beyond doing a Google search to find what zone you're in. There's a lot of nuance to it, a lot of microclimates. Here on the island of Madeira, where we live now, it's a great example. The whole thing is only 30 miles long by 14 miles tall. But we have snow in the mountains and banana trees growing at the ocean. In about a 10-minute drive, you can be between these two zones. So there's everything from, the shadow of the mountain next to you affects how rain falls. It also affects how much solar radiation. It affects how brutal your winter is going to be, the effect of wind. So really get to know your property. I think this is really something fun that you can do. Start a journal, really keep notes on what you're observing. And winter seems like there's not a lot going on, but there really is. So we're going to talk about what plants want, what people want, and how we work together to, make a successful business. I'm going to get on my soapbox about USDA winter hardiness zones. I've done this many times, but I don't think it's sunken in with everyone yet. They're called winter hardiness zones because they are meant for discussions about winter. If you email me and say, hey, Bailey, I'm in zone 7 and I have a zinnia question. Well, zone 7 doesn't tell me anything other than how cold you get in your wintertime. Your lowest average temperature in the winter, that's what dictates your zone. The zone map hasn't been updated for about 10 or 12 years now, I think. It's due to be updated. It's probably much different than it looked 10 years ago. Parts of Vermont where I lived were zone 3 reliably for decades, but now they're creeping warmer. We maybe are having some zone 5, maybe zone 6 winters in some places. So things are changing, but you can keep track of what's going on at your place. And I really do encourage this. One quick way I'll show you. There's a lot of little temperature sensors out there on the market. This Govee brand, I got it on Amazon because it was cheap. And I just wanted to have an idea of what's happening around my house here. So it's just these little sensors. You can hang them anywhere, really quite affordable. And it syncs to your phone, and then you can keep an eye on what's going on, even in multiple places on your property. Now, if I had a walk-in cooler, I would definitely have one in there. I would have one in each of my high tunnels, maybe in your field, in your seed starting area, so you know that you're maintaining temperatures. And let me just show you the kind of data it will give you. Pardon me for 1 second here. That's not what I want. Sorry, this looks different than it did last time. Well, anyway, maybe not going to find it at this moment. I was going to show you just the data readout. So it tracks the temperature. You can look at it down to the hour, to the minute, but also you get a graph that shows you what it was like last week, last month, and then you can look at the entire year. So you really understand temperature trends. You see your highs and lows, your averages, both of temperature and humidity. I think it's a really neat tool, and I think it was definitely under $50 or $60 for that box of 6 sensors that are really giving me a lot of data on a continuous basis about my property. There's a lot of different brands. I'm not married to this one. It just happens to be the one I picked up, and it's working. Yep, I'll show you the box one more time here. This brand is Govee. They have a lot of different like automated home lights you control from your iPhone, etc. But these are just the smart thermo hygrometer. So hygrometer is just the instrument that measures humidity, and thermo would be thermometer, I suppose. I hesitated to get some of these things for a long time, and it's silly because for the investment, I'm getting so much information. I don't have to keep a journal. I can just look back and see it all like at my fingertips. So there's one thing you can do. If you're curious, trying to plan out your season, look back at your historical weather. Just Google it. I think Weather Underground shows, your weather history in your location. What were your highs and lows last month, 2 months ago? You can see some real anomalies. Like, oh yeah, I remember now we had that 75-degree day or week in January, and then it went to -20. What did that do to your plants? We tend to have really bad memories about these things. It's really horrible when you're in the middle of some, extremely cold night, and then you have a sunny day, and luckily we forget about it. But it can really make a difference in how your plants perform, and it can really explain away a lot of the symptoms you might see later on in the season. So I'm all about taking notes. Maybe once a week you could just write down, this is what I saw this week. Here's the high and low. Compare that to what you expected. You might learn a bit about your property. And so once you understand what you can offer and you understand what the plants need, you have a much better possibility of giving the plant what they need at the right time, and also understanding where your weather trends are going. It was really easy for me, it got easier for me when I started realizing how many plants have similar needs. Like stock and snapdragons, they need the same thing at the same time. If you're planting in the short days, you can add campanula to that list. I would also always plant my Icelandic poppies at the same time because they all like the same temperature range. They all prefer to be planted into cold soil in the late winter, early spring, and go into spring to bloom in the the early weeks of springtime. Similarly, like zinnias, dahlias, chocolate cosmos, these are things that want warm soil, so they're going to be planted out after your last frost. So you start placing these things in groups. It's less overwhelming. It's hard to think about a couple hundred crops and their individual needs, but you can start making generalizations if you pay attention. I've talked about books. There's a lot of great books out there. Spend some of your wintertime looking. Just identify a few crops you want to know that you would like to know better. Maybe you've missed something in the production or in the quality of your stems on a certain crop. Read about it. Dig into it. Obviously, the ASCFG is a great resource. Winter's a great time to go back through those quarterly magazines if you haven't had time. Speaking of ASCFG, we will be in St. Louis in about 10 days. So we hope to see all of you there. Thomas and I will be there. One reason we moved to Madeira is that it's really easy to get back to the States. And Felicia and Allie will be there, and Grow and Sell will be there. So make sure you let us know if you're coming. We'll try to make time to have a drink with everybody. So I get a little sidetracked here. USDA winter hardiness map just tells you what your lowest winter temperature is, and then it compares it with what does the plant need. Now, what the plant's zones are not going to change. Your zone might change. So really compare notes, and then also push it by a zone or two, because a lot of times the number on the plant is a bit conservative. We found in Vermont with our heavy snows, we could often push our zones by even 1 or 2 zones sometimes. And it wasn't an issue. Something about the plugs. So most of what we sell, by volume, is Lisianthus. That's not surprising because it's slow to grow and no one enjoys growing it from seed unless you've got some, better facilities usually. I know there are exceptions, and I'm proud of you for doing a good job. Most of what we sell is a little bit frost hardy. Campanula, stock, snapdragons, Lisianthus, Ami, all the little fancy carrots. There's really not a lot of concern about getting these things in the wintertime. People sometimes get worried that their products are going to ship when it's frosty out and they're going to be damaged. In reality, plugs ship a lot better in wintertime than they ship in the summer heat because they're not able to cook in that box. So don't worry too much about it. We're also watching the weather, so we're not going to ship plants if it's going to be 20 or 30 below in between the facility and your house. But that said, most of them want to be a little cooler than warmer. There's a tendency to try to rush them inside and put them under lights in a warm room when they get to your place. You're better off putting them in your cooler if you can't get them right in the ground, because they're really thinking it's late spring or late winter, early spring. They're in cold mode. I know Grow and Sell actually takes your plugs before they ship them to you, and they'll spend about a week in a cold greenhouse just to, tone them up a little bit, get them ready for what's coming, the cold ground that they're going to go into at your house to be happy. So embrace the cold a little bit. Within reason, plugs generally want to be cold. There are exceptions. Those are the zinnias, the celosias, the tropical things. Those definitely want to be planted later and want to be planted warm. So like I said, get to know your crops individually. Another thing, when you get your plugs, don't leave them outside if it's going to drop below freezing. The roots are exposed. They just have that little bit of tray between them and the outside air. They'll freeze solid, and the roots are really not adapted for that kind of abuse. The leaves of a plant are much hardier, much more cold hardy than the roots are, because the roots are generally buried in the earth. The earth is generally holding some temperature or holding some warmth. So once they're planted, most of these frost hardy things, I don't worry about them dropping down to 20, not an issue. But before they're planted, don't leave that tray outside exposed to the elements. I do remember a friend of mine left her Lysianthus out a few years ago, and it was like 18 trays, and they almost all died because there was a cold snap. So just keep that in mind. Cool, but not abusively cold. When you're planting, think about what your winter, a lot of you already have your hardy annuals in, but just think about what's the drainage like. Cold and saturated is a really bad combination. You will lose a lot of plants if they sit wet all winter long. So maybe pick your best drained beds. That's where your fall planted stuff is going to go, because won't have the chance to hang out in the water. Another thing that will really get them, in addition to being really wet all winter, is if you have a lot of freezing and thawing. So that's happening. I don't know. I'm originally from Kentucky. I spent a lot of my formative years in Kentucky, and what a great place for freezing and thawing. It's always freezing rain followed by a warm day, followed by more freezing rain. And that can be really rough on plants. We're going to talk about how to mitigate some of those swings in just a minute. But this is all information you can learn just by paying attention about what's happening in your own yard, on your own farm. So we all have a general idea how winter is going to go. And then there's those times when that cold snap is coming. Generally, we have a pretty good idea of it these days. But what do you do? So one thing you can do is be prepared before it happens. Now, where we lived in the States, we couldn't just go out and get Remay or get, Agribon row cover. But sometimes I wish we had it, and I wish I had just taken the time back in October, November to order it just in case. So I encourage you to have a little kit, or a little, a big kit ready for these events. Hopefully you don't need to use it. But, Agribon is the brand name of, or Remay is another brand name. Just row cover. Get the thickest stuff you can and be ready to put it out. Have some sandbags ready full of sand. Those little staples are not really that helpful. All you need is a little bit of wind to get under there, and you're going to lose that cover. You're going to lose the heat retention properties of the cover, and you're going to lose plants. So just be ready with, really sandbags. Sandbags are the best thing to hold down your row cover, and be ready with your row cover. Another thing you can do sometimes if it's going to be really cold is you can run Christmas lights in between your plants. Now, don't get the LED lights because they don't give off any heat. Look for the older style incandescent bulbs that do give off a little bit of heat. Make sure you have electricity near these plants. That can give you those couple degrees that make the difference between, keeping your plant alive and having it perish over the winter. Most of these winter hardy plants are hardy to like a zone 7. So they're generally fairly hardy things, but maybe you're north of that and you are pushing your boundaries. Maybe you've had a warm spell in February followed by another cold snap. That's really when we see the most damage from these winter freezes. It's when you've had some unseasonably warm weather that have triggered new, lush, tender growth on your plants, followed by a real cold snap. And that's when you need to be ready to jump into action. So I mentioned Agribon, a little bit of extra heat from Christmas lights, sandbags to hold it down. Mulch. Now's a great time of year to get leaves. Better if you can get them chopped. You can buy leaf choppers. that will just shred them up, and then maybe just have them in the aisle by your bed. You don't have to smother them all winter long, but be ready to rake it over if you've got that really cold snap coming. Or maybe once winter finally fully sets in, pull those leaves over just to give them a little bit of, really a little air. Air is the best insulator. That's why styrofoam is such a great insulator. It's just all this little trapped air. Leaves are, pine needles are, straw is. Anything that's just gonna give you a blanket of air that keeps, really keeps the fluctuations in your soil temperature down. Many things are very cold hardy, but they can't go back and forth a lot. They just don't know what to do with that. All right, I'm happy to answer any specific crop questions. Send those to me while we're getting through here. I have a couple more tips, and then I wanna just go to questions and see what you're thinking about for fall, for winter, for next season. Like I said, this is kind of broad ranging, but I'm really giving you advice that I never took myself. I was always scrambling at the last minute and I was unprepared. So these are just some things that I wish I had done that I think you're smart if you will do as I say, not as I do. If you have high tunnels, well, obviously keeping snow off your high tunnel, that's very basic. But how are you gonna water in there? Vermont obviously froze pretty solid every winter, and getting water out to my plants was always a bit of a concern. So I actually would keep my hose in a heated place. I had a heated cover over my faucet. I never had a frost-free hydrant, unfortunately. They're very much worth the effort or worth the expense if you were putting up new greenhouses in freezing areas. Like what a luxury to just turn on fresh, clean water in your high tunnel in the middle of winter. I never had that. I wish I had. It would have saved a lot of stress. You need to be ready to ventilate your tunnels in the winter. Don't let if you're overwintering things in the tunnel, don't let it get up into the 80s and 90s in there in the wintertime. Those like late February, early March days, the sun is coming back. You get more intensity and it feels great to be in there, but sometimes you'll trigger some plants to come out of dormancy sooner than they should. I'm thinking about these new fancy tissue culture campanula. They are true biennials. They need probably about a 10-week period below 45 degrees. They want a true winter spell. So sometimes these fluctuations will cancel out some of that chilling period. So be ready to ventilate your houses. Ideally, you would have them on fans that would do that automatically. But be sensitive to keeping your cool tunnels cool in the wintertime. Same with humidity. On those hot days, the plants transpire. You quickly get 100% humidity in your houses, and that is really just asking for fungal diseases. Hopefully, you've already got a backup heater if you're growing in a tunnel, or at least make sure you've tested your heaters if you run a warm house. Nothing more devastating than having all your spring plants, having your heater go out on that cold night. All right. Some of the things I've learned through the years, we used to push ourselves just super hard. Thomas had the bakery, we had the flower farm. We were selling at farmers markets, we were selling to florists. Eventually we were selling wholesale. And we were exhausted. We would hit the wall pretty often. And sometimes in the middle of the season when you just can't go on anymore, but you have to, it just really takes a toll. So that's when we started traveling a little bit in the wintertime to get some sunshine and to step away. So I encourage you to prioritize that. I think it's really the best thing we ever did for our business was to step away for a week, 2 weeks if you have it. And yes, something's always gonna go wrong, something's gonna freeze, but you're gonna have some sanity that you can face the next season with. So I really do recommend just taking some time completely off. We all work very hard and we deserve that. Great time to read, nothing better than kind of getting bored with winter and opening up those seed catalogs and books and thinking and dreaming about the next season. Going to conferences, great thing. Obviously, the one in ASCFG is next week, the week after next in St. Louis. But there's many conferences, regional conferences that happen all winter long. Prioritize these. You not only learn a lot, but you make a lot of friends. I think it's really something that I was hesitant to do early on, especially when our business wasn't making that much money. But those tips that I learned at those conferences are what allowed us to turn our business around. And obviously crop planning. You can spend as much time crop planning as you can spend all season, planning your crop. Get some stuff on paper. It's never gonna turn out exactly as you plan, but really think about your space. Like, how much can I actually fit in this space? I'm a chronic over orderer. I always order too many plugs, I order too many seeds, and then I'm like, what am I supposed to do with these? And I was really just flushing money down the toilet. So really just, think critically, measure your beds, have a nice map of your farm. It's really going to help you to plan things accordingly. Great. Just gonna see if we have any questions here. Yeah, I've got a couple over here. Excellent. Like I said, no real agenda today. Just wanted to give you some ideas to get ready for winter. So if you got other questions about your season, products, let them rip. We're here to help. Okay, one more time. Someone wanted to see this box one more time. This is the brand is Gove, however you say it. Smart Thermo Hygrometer. And it just comes with 6 of these little guys. There's a little device you plug in that communicates with your router. These technologies are really come a long way. I was hesitant about all these things early on, but the tools are really nice. Also to be able to check while you are away. We were just on a family trip last week, 2 weeks ago, and we had friends staying in our house here in Madeira, and they said, oh, it's kind of warm, kind of windy. Well, I was checking, and the humidity here had dropped down to, I think, 16%, which is very low for here. And I've got hundreds of potted plants around the house, and they're going to dry out really fast. Also with the high wind. So I was able to tell my house sitter, like, you really need to crank up your irrigation this week because I can tell that it's really dry, and that even though I wasn't looking at the plant, I knew for sure that they were dehydrating. And it worked. He saved everything. So it's a really great way to keep in touch without actually leaving the comfort of your seat. Okay, someone asked again what my drink was. This is the Limonana. It is a bourbon lemonade, essentially. This has a little bit of maple syrup in it because, well, we still love maple syrup, even though it's a little harder to come by over here. We brought 4 gallons with us from America. Okay, so someone asked about using a freezer for tulips. I mentioned I got a chest freezer. I'm running it with, if you've heard of this guy, so this is the Inkbird is the brand. I don't know what that means. So what it does, it's not unlike a CoolBot because it's a thermostat that turns things on and off. So you can actually have a cooling device and a heating device and tell this what temperature you want to maintain, and it will turn one or the other on to maintain a temperature. It has a little temperature sensor here. And this plugs into the wall, and then you plug your device into one of these, depending on if you want to heat or cool things. What I'm using it for right now is on a chest freezer. I want that to drop down to probably 45 at this point in the season, and then probably a little bit cooler as I start to see roots on my tulip bulbs. And this will keep track of that. I'm gonna have a little fan in there to circulate the air so we have even temperatures top to bottom, left to right. It's a great tool. It's $50. You can get them on Amazon or maybe somewhere else. You can also run that's something I did in Vermont. I ran a heater in my cooler in the wintertime. Little counterintuitive. You have this insulated box. It's already probably equipped to have water spilled on the floor. So I would use my walk-in cooler as a germination chamber in the wintertime. Fairly airtight. You can get your humidity nice and warm in there, or nice, elevated humidity. Just having a little oil-filled radiator heater on one of these Inkbird controllers is all I needed to get it to a nice 75 degrees in there. Plus, I had my fluorescent tubes. They also gave off some heat. So even if it was 20, 30 below outside, I could still have a nice warm environment in my walk-in cooler. So don't, if you live in a place with cold winters, maybe you're not running your cooler, or you don't need it, or you don't think it's very useful. But an insulated space is always good to have. Okay, so the question was about tulips. These are really, I'm not growing flowers commercially in our new home. These are just for myself. We don't get quite cold enough here in Madeira for tulips. Some daffodils are fine here, and freesia and some South African bulbs are very happy here. But no tulips, and I miss having tulips. So I'm using it as a bulb cooler, you know, what they used to call a rooting room. I'm sure I've showed this book before. The Holland Bulb Forcer's Guide. I think it was last printed in like 96, unfortunately. If you can ever find a copy of this in a used bookstore, get it. Sometimes you'll see it pop up again on Amazon. Sorry, I'm not trying to promote them. But for like $1,000. So check out used bookstores or used book websites. If you are growing bulbs, forcing bulbs, this book has been invaluable. It tells you temperature ranges and for how long you need to hold each type of bulb at a certain temperature. So that's essentially what I'm doing. You could use your walk-in cooler as a rooting room if you were trying to force bulbs out of season. I see more and more people pushing their tulip season early. I think that's great. I'm not a true bulb expert, but I do know that all the information I've ever needed has been in that book, if you can find it. Someone's asking if they should put their bulbs in the fridge prior to planting. You can actually trigger your tulips that it's okay to flower by chilling them before. You can also buy chilled bulbs if you're living in, I think Texas, Southern California, maybe the Gulf states. These are places that don't get quite enough chill to satisfy tulips. You'll know because your tulips are gonna be really short. If they haven't had enough chilling period, if they bloom, they're gonna be really tiny. So that's the first thing you should think about if you see a short tulip, is that it didn't get the chill it needs. You can chill them just in the bag or in the crate. You get better results if you plant them first in a tray or in a pot and then chill them. So if you're growing in bulb crates, you can chill them right in that bulb crate and then pull them into your high tunnel or your warmer space. I should say you could even flower a lot of these things under lights in that walk-in cooler. You could even grow hyacinths and possibly tulips under lights, completely devoid of natural light. So I'm not in the bulb game, but I think bulbs are really, really fun and fascinating. And there's something that I used to like to play around with in the wintertime to satisfy my horticultural curiosity, you know, with products that I wasn't actually trying to sell actively. Okay, Patty Eisenhower, no frostmas yet in southern Vermont. If you don't understand the joke, frostmas frost can sometimes feel like a gift at the end of the season. Sometimes it's a bit of a gut punch if you've got a beautiful crop that you're just about to harvest and you don't get it in time. But by now, I think most everyone's probably ready for a little break. So tips on overwintering heirloom mums. So a few weeks ago, I spoke with Steve and Mandy of Three Porch Farm. I think we talked about this a bit, but let's talk about them. Mums will generally overwinter in a tunnel. Even in northern Vermont, they would generally live. So the thing is, they wouldn't really emerge until May or sometimes June of the next year when things really started to warm up. And by that point, I had lost the chance to take many cuttings off of them. So the reason you would be overwintering heirloom mums is to take more cuttings to replenish your stock for the next year. Mums are best planted out fresh every spring. So what I would recommend is either dig up one of your plants from last year and put it in a couple gallon pot. Put that in the garage. You could put that in your walk-in cooler that you're maintaining at 38 degrees. You put it in your basement. You want to give them a cool winter, but then if they're in a pot, at any point you can turn the heat up and you can put them under lights and they're going to flush those new cuttings really quickly. So either dig up a plant and put it in a pot, or you could just take a cutting and grow your stock plants for next year in a separate area of pots that you just are ready to protect. It's not going to tie up a bed, so you could plant a spring crop in its place. But I always preferred growing my heirloom mum stock plants in pots. I think it's just much easier to manage. They will often overwinter if it's not too terribly cold, but they're going to emerge probably a little too late to be that useful to you. Okay, Sally says because of a late frost, also I'm assuming kind of lingering summer heat, the fall planted snapdragons are a foot tall and they are budding. Should you cut them back? I would cut them back. The snapdragons are very capable of branching from, if you pinch a snapdragon, you're gonna get multiple stems. So essentially what you would be doing by taking the flower out now is just giving it a hard pinch. They're not gonna do much growing. There's not much light. Hopefully you are finally cooling off. Go in and pinch those flower buds out, and you'll see probably 4 or 6 side shoots emerging as spring comes along. That's the trick with fall planting. Sometimes you get them in too early and it's still too warm and they want to go on and flower. So I might recommend, push that date back by 2 or 3 weeks next year, just based on what you're actually observing. There's no better way to guide you than to pay attention to what you've done the previous year. So if they flowered too early this year, you can prevent that a bit by pushing them a little bit later next year. When is it okay for the row cover to touch the foliage? That's a neat question. Let's say, when is it not okay? When is it not okay is if you're trying to protect blooms. You can't really have that fabric laying right on your flower buds or the flowers. If it frosts outside, that's going to freeze to the flower and you're going to see a lot of damage. I'm thinking of foxglove. Foxglove seems to really love to leaf out if it gets a little bit warm, and then you have this tender growth sitting there. You're not selling those leaves, you're selling the flower that comes later. So I'm really not worried about a little bit of frost damage on the top. You're really trying to trap some heat at the root zone. That's the, foxglove is kind of rosette shaped. Obviously the roots are down here. But the growing point is buried in the middle of that plant. So you're really trying to keep that alive. You want to minimize the damage to the foliage, but they will keep going if they get a little frost damage. So if it's a matter of getting your plants covered quickly, you might have a lot of rows that need covering. Generally, I would just let the frost cloth touch the plants. Maybe not ideal. You could throw some straw over first, or some pine straw, and then throw your cover over. But I think the important part is just getting that cover on and making sure it's secure. So don't worry too much about hoops and it touching. It's always a little bit of triage when you get that hard freeze coming, because you're in denial of it. You don't want to. Sometimes keeping things too tight, too covered, leads to more problems than leaving them uncovered. But when it's time to do it. And so I think cover the best you can. I know I'm being a little bit wishy-washy. As long as you're not trying to sell the part that's touching the fabric, just go on and get them covered. Can Lisianthus take freezing temperatures once it's planted? Yes, it can. Frosts dips down to 20 degrees are really no problem for Lisianthus. Don't worry about that. If it's going to be like below 20 for a long time, then yes, be concerned about that. But if it's otherwise, you've been above freezing and you get a little dip, it's going to be okay when the plant is young. Most of these plants have much more cold tolerance when they're young as compared to when they're in the flowering stage. Naturally in the wild, they germinate in the wintertime, in the cold part of the year, and they're going to flower in the hot part of the year. So they have a vegetative stage, and then they have a flowering stage. Philodia Love Flowers asks more about using a walk-in cooler as a germination chamber. I think I learned this from actually Steve and Mandy down at Three Porch Farm. They're in Georgia, so their winters are very mild. It takes very little for them to turn their cooler on, or to heat it up in there. But then I realized, our walk-in cooler had probably 2-inch, kind of that blue board foam insulation. It was very tight in there. It didn't take much to cool it, and it didn't take much to heat it. So we actually just got one of those small oil-filled radiators. You can get them at any home improvement store or Walmart, that kind of place. They're really quite affordable to run, and it doesn't take much to keep that small space. Like our cooler's about 8 by 8 by 8. Just that one little heater was plenty. Also, I have my lights, I had my racks of lights set up in there, and they give off heat as well. You do want to keep a couple fans circulating, so you're mixing that air and keeping the temperature uniform all around. But yeah, you have this insulated space. It's kind of waterproof already. It's not in your living room or on your dining room table that are going to get damaged if you bring in the hose. So I think more people should consider using your walk-in coolers as germination chambers. It always worked really, really quite well for me. Olive Farm Stand in the Seattle area, I'm reading here, in the Seattle area, I find daylight is a better planting tool for me than frost, since our frost dates can easily be 6 weeks different from year to year. Light is more predictable. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. So let me read that again. This person feels that daylight or day length, I suppose, is a far better planting tool than frost dates. Frost dates are moving both directions. Sometimes, we're seeing weird cold snaps in the middle of a warm season and weird warm snaps in the middle of a cold season. So if you can figure out what, your day length is not going to change. The solstice and the equinox are always going to have the same day length at your latitude. If that changes, then we're all extraordinarily doomed. So you can really, if you figure out, what was my day length on a certain day last year, and I planted on that day and it worked, just stick with that date. Our temperatures are related to our light intensity and day length. So just go straight for the day length and you will find your sweet spot for when to plant your fall plants. Also, just once you figure that out, you can use your week number. Week numbers can't vary more than a few days one way or the other. Generally, week 1 starts with January 1st, but depending on how that falls each year, sometimes it's assigned a little earlier or later. But if you know that week 44 is great for you for planting your poppies, take note of that and try it and do it again next year. If it seemed a little late, try to move it if you can. Not sure who said this one, but they've noticed that growth drops off a cliff regardless of temperatures when you get less than 10 hours of day length. And this person is saying November 1st is when that happens for them. I couldn't agree more. You might have heard this concept of the Persephone period, and I believe that is kind of related to the 10-hour benchmark. Below 10 hours, that means you're pretty far from the sun, you're not getting much intensity, and then you're also not getting the duration of light. So 10 hours is a good marker. I think about campanula. I always recommend people get it in the ground, hopefully by when you have fewer than 10 hours, because as you quickly go from 10 to 12 in northern parts of the country. So getting them in at 10, that you're still firmly in the short day period. So that was also Olive Farm Stand. You sound like a smart person. Paying attention to your day length is a really great idea. So yeah, think about that. Figure out at your latitude, the changes by latitude. If you're in the equator, you get 12 hours every day. Think about people in northern Alaska. They're going to have very long days in the summertime and almost no light at all in the winter. So those of us in between, we have a point where we will have 10 hours of day length if you are far enough north. Right here in Madeira, Portugal, we're on the 33rd parallel. That is the same as Atlanta. It's the same as San Diego. We get our shortest day of the year is 10 hours. So that's part of why things grow all year long here. They slow down a bit in the darker, shorter days, but our shorter days are not that short and they're not that limiting. But when you get below 10 hours of day length, you will see that most things stop growing. And then when you surpass that in the spring, they'll start growing again. So mark those on your calendar. Great tips. I've gotten this question a few times lately. My mums are about to bloom in the field and we have frost predicted. Do I need to protect them? Yes. I try to hammer that home early in the season during mum ordering. Mums are heat lovers. They need the warmth to develop their flowers. And while the plants are frost hardy when they're small, the flowers are not frost hardy. So below 34, get out there and get them covered. That's the real bummer of mums, that they bloom just as things are getting cold. That's why if you have a tunnel, planting mums in your tunnel is really, really a good idea. Fiona asked, in her zone 4B or 5A, can they grow fall planted snapdragons and campanula in the field, or do you need row cover? It's a little on the edge. People say snapdragons are hardy to zone 4. If you have a lot of freezing and thawing cycles, they might not make it. They're definitely going to be happier in a tunnel, or even under row cover might be enough. Campanula also makes kind of a flat rosette. I think it's probably better suited to hanging out under fabric, under a row cover all winter. You're on the edge for both of those. I think campanula and snapdragons are similarly hardy. They would be happier a little bit warmer, but if you're ready to jump, ready to mulch them, ready to cover them if it gets bad, then I think you can probably get away with it. Valley View Flower Farm says, glad to hear you talk about how Lizzie can handle cold. A few years ago, they had 800 in the ground. They had a solid week of overnights hovering around 20 degrees and then a day of sleet and 30 miles an hour. I hope they lived. I was looking for the punchline there. So yes, Lisianthus is actually from the plains. It's from America, places that get some cold snaps in the wintertime. One more question here. We still have a little more time. If you have questions, keep firing. Otherwise, I'll just answer this one and we'll sign off. Someone asking, are there any good winter cut flowers? Well, the answer is yes. I'm thinking of another question in an email I got this week from someone wanting Lisianthus on Mother's Day. And they were hoping they could just plant their Lisianthus early, or how early do you need to plant it to have it blooming for Mother's Day? Well, the real limiting factors are if you plant in the middle of winter, you don't have enough sunlight and you don't have enough heat unless you are in a heated greenhouse with supplemental light. So you can manipulate anything to bloom in winter. There are some great flowers that will flower in winter. Anemones are a great one, especially if you don't have too terribly cold winters. Ranunculus. It's another one that blooms very similarly with anemones. We're not selling those yet, but we're working on it. We have a line on some new ranunculus that we'll hope to be offering to you in the next year or two. Tulips are a great one to force. Again, I'm not really in the tulip business, but they don't need much heat, so they're really nice. You can program them by keeping them in your cooler and then pulling crates out one at a time or 10 at a time, and then forcing them in your heated greenhouse. I think my favorite winter bloom would be hellebores. Hellebores naturally want to flower in winter. Some actually are flowering now. And we have some really nice hellebores left in the store, these Heuger hellebores. Actually in December, I think we're doing a whole Instagram live where we just talk about these amazing hellebores, mostly the Ice and Roses series. And there's a new winter ballet one that will actually flower in the winter if you are warm enough. Now that might be keep them above 35 or 40 and they'll flower. Just because it is a winter flower, it might not flower for you if you are too cold. So in Vermont, hellebores would wait until May until things really thawed before they would bloom. So yeah, those are some of my favorite winter flowering plants. Really kind of depends on how you are. Can you manipulate things a little bit one way or the other? But those are my favorite winter flowering plants. So back to the person who had 800 Lisianthus in a really bad spell of weather. She only lost a couple plants with no row cover. So one thing to remember when you see these storms coming is just to take a deep breath. You might be okay. You want to protect your investment. You spent a lot of time and money on these things, but the plants want to live, and generally they are more cold tolerant than we give them credit for. All right, y'all. I think that's about it for today. I hope you are ready for winter and can find the joy in winter. Like I said, take a little trip if you live in a place where it gets to be a bit much. I look forward to seeing you all in St. Louis. That starts in 10 days. Let me get my dates correct here. It starts on Monday, November 6th. So I'll be at do a tour of Urban Buds Flower Farm. I hope you know of Mimo and Miranda out at Urban Buds, really inspirational growers and good friends of mine. I'm excited to see you all. If I see you there, just come and say hi. I'm sure I recognize your name from orders and from emails. I might look busy because I'm talking to a lot of friends, but that doesn't mean I don't want to talk to you as well. And I encourage, if you're there, go up to any old stranger and start talking to them. We're all there to talk about flowers and to compare notes on what we're doing. So, all right, that's it for me. Thank you all. Hope you have a good week. Hope your frosts are, well, either really bad or haven't happened yet, depending on what you want from your season. And we'll talk soon.